Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stronger Roots. We are here with a very special guest today. Her name is Dr. Amy Baker, and Beth is going to tell us a little bit more about Amy.
Yeah, love to. Thanks, Amy, for being with us today. Dr. Baker is a nationally recognized expert in parental alienation and parent-child relationships, especially children of divorce and emotional abuse of children. She has a Ph.D. in developmental psychology from Teachers College of Columbia University. She's the author or co-author of 10 books and over 120 academic articles on topics related to children's well-being. That's impressive. Thank you, Amy, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Amy, one of your books, the Parenting Under Fire, we're just going to jump right in. Parenting Under Fire, you describe a child's rejection is often rooted in pain rather than hatred. Can you explain what's happening emotionally for a child that's caught in this type of dynamic?
That's a great question. So, from the parent's perspective, a parent who's being rejected, their perspective is they're chasing their child and their child is rejecting them, treating them badly. And the kid might even say, I hate you, you horrible, etc. Very, very rejecting. However, it is important to think about it from the perspective of the child. And one of the things I say is inside every rejecting child is a child who feels rejected by the parent who they are rejecting. I know that's a little circular, but from the parent's perspective, their child is rejecting them, but the child is doing that because they are hurt. And the reason they're hurt is if it's alienation, the other parent is engaging in behaviors that are encouraging the child to feel and believe that the targeted parent is unsafe, unloving, unavailable. Those three things, some combination, unsafe, unloving, and unavailable. It's always those three. Whatever the manifest content is, your parent didn't do this, your parent didn't do that, whatever the surface complaints are, underneath it is the experience the child has that that parent doesn't really care about them, doesn't really want to keep them safe, doesn't love them. And that's what then sparks the child to be so hurt and angry with the parent that they're rejecting.
Mm. Yeah, this is happening more and more. We're finding as we're doing the podcast that so many families are being affected by alienation. And how do you strip it all the way down from the start? Like, say you're in a toxic, relationship, marriage. How do you start to figure out that your child's been alienated instead of just, this being part
Sure,
of
because it seems like parental alienation is such like a buzzword. I hate to say that,
lately?
but I feel
Well,
like it's not being taken seriously and it's being used to hurt more than it's to identify an issue.
I think one of the reasons it's a buzzword is because it's very appealing. Anybody who's being rejected by their child would certainly rather think that the other parent put the child up to it than that they did something. And I think that partly rightly so, people are skeptical. And I think that the best thing we can do to address that skepticism is to have better tools for differentiating and better training for differentiating an alienated child from a child who is realistically estranged. So let me back up. When a child is resisting and refusing contact with the parent, there's two competing explanations. Alienation, parent A is causing the child to reject parent B, or estrangement. Parent B did something that led the child to reject them. Most rejected parents think it's alienation. Most favored parents think it's estrangement, right? It's very rare where the two parents agree about the explanation. And most professionals think it's a combination of the two. So that's sort of the crux of the whole problem, is that everybody has a competing narrative and many people are not trained to distinguish an alienated child from an estranged child. There are ways to do it. It's complicated. We call it the Baker model or the 5-factor model. There's a lot of pieces to the model. There's a lot of evidence you need, but when the model is properly applied, it is possible to look at a situation and say, oh, this is an alienation situation, this is not.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
I did also want to just say one other thing, which is a lot of times people assume or ask me, is this an epidemic? Isn't it getting worse? Don't we have more cases? And the truth is, we don't know that that's true. There's definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, my perception is that there's a belief that there are more cases. But that is likely to be caused by the fact that there's more knowledge out there.
That's
You
what
know,
I was
20
just going
years
to say.
ago,
Yeah.
20 years ago, if you Googled, why does my child hate me?
right.
Or is my, is the other parent turning my child against me? I don't think that would show much on a Google search. And now you're going to find lots and lots and lots of YouTube videos and books and websites about it. So
Yeah.
people are coming to the term more quickly. Back in the day when I first started, I would have people come to me and say, I don't really know what's going on, and now people are like, this is alienation. Like they're coming more armed with information. I've used the 5-factor model and 13 of the 17, blah, blah. Like people are just more educated about it. Does it mean it's actually more common? We don't know.
Mhm.
I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you talk about the model or the factor model, like can you speak about that? Like what are some things that you're
So the 5-factor model, which we do call the Baker model because in psychology, there's this other thing called the 5-factor model that has nothing to do with alienation.
okay.
So in this model, there are 5 factors, each of which has to be present in order to say that a rejecting child is alienated. If any one of them is no, it's no. So the first is, and I'm just going to say, it used to be called the 4-factor model. And somebody convinced me to add this first thing as a factor, and I still kind of rankle at it because it's not really a factor, it's a precondition. It's that there is a child rejecting a parent. So to me, I gave into peer pressure. Now I have to live with it. So the second factor is presence of a prior positive relationship between the child and the parent who the child is now rejecting. So you can't have no relationship and then say, my child's rejecting me. Like I had a case where the father was in jail for 11 years and he shows up after 11 years and his kid doesn't want to see him. That's not alienation. There was just no relationship to begin with. The third factor is absence of abuse or neglect on the part of the now rejected parent. If a parent had a prior positive, so they are already at factor 3, they had a prior positive relationship, but they did something really egregious, molested the child, beat the child. The models closes down, it's not alienation. There has to be absence of abuse or neglect. Any parent who abuses or neglects a child cannot claim it's alienation. That's sort of, to me, like a period paragraph. The next factor, factor 4, is that the favored parent is engaging in many, doesn't have to be all, we have no particular number cutoff, but many of the 17 primary parental alienation strategies. These are behaviors that research shows can foster in a child the false belief that the parent doesn't love them or is unsafe, unloving, unavailable. A lot of times people get confused and they think, my kid's rejecting me, therefore it must be that the favored parent is doing these things, right? I know my ex is bad mouthing me because my kid's mad at me all the time. That's backward thinking. In order to get through the model and show that it's alienation, you have to have independent knowledge and proof that the other parent is doing these things. You can't infer that they're doing it because your kid's rejecting you. All right. The final factor, factor 5, is that the child is exhibiting the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation. So these behaviors are unique and specific to alienated kids. Research shows that even kids who are abused, abandoned, neglected, molested by a parent do not show these behaviors towards the parent who did these terrible things to them. Only alienated kids exhibit those behaviors. So if you have a rejecting kid who's rejecting a parent where there was a positive relationship, that parent didn't do anything that would cause the child to reject them. The favored parent is doing all these things that cause children to falsely reject a parent, and the child is exhibiting these specific behaviors that only alienated kids exhibit, then it's alienation. So that's the model.
That's complex.
Yeah.
Well, it takes into account everybody's behavior. There are people who say, show me a kid and I'll tell you if they're alienated. And I do not believe that that is sufficient information. So I want to know proof that the other parent was a good parent and didn't do anything terrible. I want proof that the favored parent is doing these things that cause alienation. And then I want to see the effect in the child. So I used to be an expert witness. I went all around the country, and I kind of learned trial by fire, sort of what the holes in the logic were. And that's why I created that model. It's kind of bulletproof because it does take into account every sort of plausible alternative to why the child would be rejecting the parent.
And it makes a lot of sense. A lot of the cases that I'm appointed to are teenagers. I don't know why I get the teenagers. I guess I handle them better than others. I don't know. But it's the constant slamming the doors. I hate you. I don't want to be here. I don't want you to be my family. I don't want blah, 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 blah. You know, these things. All of mine are in adoptions now. And that makes sense because some of that behavior is typical teenage adolescent behavior, attitude and smart mouth and things like that, some of it. So I think it's important that we have the ability to differentiate and have discernment over that situation, because if not, we're not going to put the right help in place.
And it would definitely reduce the criticism or address the criticism that abusive parents are using parental alienation as a cover, right? So if you have, a dad who's being rejected by the kids and the dad says, no, I didn't do anything wrong, it's alienation. Sometimes there are people who look at that dynamic and say, oh, that's a bad dad who's just using parental alienation as an excuse. He actually did something terrible, and that's why the kids are rejecting him. And if, in fact, that dad did something terrible, then it can't be alienation, and it sort of removes that cover for him to hide behind.
And that's been a lot of my experience on some of my cases. And we do supervised visits here in my office as well. And we do get a lot of supervised visits coming from domestic court for reasons like this. And I think, well, in the cases that I have seen a couple where it really wasn't parental alienation, but that alienated parent was bringing in expert witness on, I don't even know what it was. It was crazy. It's forensic something, psychologist. And it just was you could just see it kind of playing out. But he was absolutely, for the things that was on record, they were on record that he had actually done toward the kids, that I'm over here like, this isn't alienation. So I'm glad that you said that and said that, because that gives some really clear boundaries.
Right. I think that alienation experts have a bad rap, that somehow it's gotten into the zeitgeist that we think every rejecting child is alienated, and that we're always sympathetic towards parents who are being rejected and want to kind of help them get their kids back. And that's definitely not my position. And I don't think it's the position of any of my colleagues who are experts. It's like, no, if you abused your kid, you have to own up and have abuse specific treatment, not alienation specific treatment.
Dr. Baker, back to the model. When you said that there are behaviors that the alienating parent does, can you mention a few of those? And then can you also mention some of the things that the child displays. Is there, just a few that you could talk about that?
Absolutely. When I was an expert witness, I had to go on the stand and memorize all of this. I could talk for hours, so I'm not going to do that. But I would literally go through each of the 17 with like a paragraph about each one, like why it
Wow.
was important and what it meant and examples. And so anyway, these 17 behaviors were identified through research, both research with adults who lived through this as kids and could say what their parents did, as well as research with adults who were dealing with the rejection of their child, what they think the other parent was doing. And then it went through many research procedures to really come up with a valid and reliable list. It doesn't mean it's exhaustive. Somebody can always come up with something else. But if many of these 17 things are going on, it would be a check yes for factor 4 on the 5-factor model. So you start with sort of the basics of bad mouthing the other parent, limiting contact, interfering with communication, withholding love and approval. So if the child says something positive about the targeted parent, the alienator becomes cold, disapproving, rejecting of the child. So they get the message like, oh, it's not really okay to be joyful or happy or say I had a good time with that other parent. Calling that parent by their first name, referring to somebody else as mom or dad instead of that parent as mom or dad, withholding information from that parent so they can't be involved in the child's life, having the child spy on that parent or keep secrets from that parent, allowing the child to choose whether to see that other parent, so sort of treating that time as optional, or even forcing the child to reject spending time with that other parent. Trying to think. I probably missed a few, but for each one, I could talk for hours. Let me give you an example. One of them is referring to the other parent by their first name. And one of the things I learned just sort of in my readings is that every human culture has special names that kids call their parents. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I have this sort of image of like a kid in a tribe and something's happening, they're unsafe or hurt, and they call out, Sally, and only one person is going to hear that. But if they call mom, all the moms would hear it, and the kid would be saved. I don't actually know that that's the reason, but it is a fact. Most of the time, it starts with the syllables, M and mom or dad, because those are the syllables that infants babble spontaneously. Those are the first spontaneous sounds. And then parents shape that like, mom, yes, you said mommy. That's not necessarily what the kid was thinking when they're going, mom, mom, mom. They're just like enjoying making sounds, right? But we encourage that. And like I said, every culture has it, a special name for each of the parents. So when a child hears the alienating parent start calling the other parent by their first name, so Joe is here to pick you up rather than dad's here, right? Or Shirley's on the phone instead of mom's on the phone. It connotes to the child that person is no longer special to you. They don't have a special role. You don't have an intimate relationship with them because the words mom and dad have such meaning to a child. It connotes a unique and special relationship. You're the only one who gets to call that parent mom or dad, you and your siblings. So if parent A is now referring to parent B by their first name, parent A is conveying to the child, not saying it explicitly, but conveying they're not special. They have no special role in your life. They don't have any meaning to you. They're the same as anybody else that you would call by their first name. So it's a very impactful alienation strategy, even if it's just like changing one word. Instead of saying mom's on the phone, saying Amy's on the phone. It's one word difference, but it's a world of difference. And parents who experience it can't always articulate why, but intuitively they feel that they're being demoted. They feel like there's an inner circle in the child's life and they're being pushed to the outside of that circle, right? And it's especially impactful when the parent, the alienator, replaces the rejected targeted parent with somebody else. So it's not just Amy's on the phone, right? And this new person is your mom, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like there's a circle and the circle has closed and the targeted parent is on the outside of that circle. So it's very, very impactful.
Yeah.
And yet the alienator can just be like, gosh, I just called them by their first name. What's the big deal? But to the parent, it really feels like a punch in the gut. And the problem is that when targeted parents are exposed to these alienation strategies, it's through the child. It's the child who's calling them then by their first name, right? So the kid hears it, Amy's on the phone, Amy's on the phone. So the kid comes home, Amy, can I have a cookie? And that, the parent feels like, oh my God, I've been demoted. Or they find out their child spied on them or kept secrets from them or didn't tell them other relevant information. All those alienation strategies come from the parent through the child to the targeted parent. And so the conflict is between the targeted parent and the child. The parent who says, why did you spy on me? Why are you keeping secrets from me? Why are you calling me by my first name? And that conflict is what feeds the alienation. So the kid then says, gee, dad's right. Mom is such a B, or mom, we don't have fun, or mom's right. Dad is depressed all the time, even if dad's depressed because he's being the victim of the alienation. So the alienation instigates conflict and distance and strife in the relationship between the parent and child.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then also, like gatekeeping information, is that another one of the
So
tactics that
I try to keep away from all labels. So I don't use gatekeeping, love bombing, gaslighting. I don't talk about people being toxic. I try not to talk about people being abusive. I just have this narcissist. I could go on and on. There's like a whole universe of jargon that people now.
are, yeah.
I have clients, coaching clients who are like, my ex is a narcissistic, love bombing, gatekeeping, dark triad, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, say it in normal. What are they doing?
Slow it
Tell me
down.
about their behavior. I don't
Yeah.
want to hear labels. So I don't personally use gatekeeping. I talk about limiting contact. So it's, Johnny can't come today. He's got other plans, right? So that's limiting contact, and withholding information. And those are two separate, very powerful, very meaningful, very impactful parental alienation strategies.
But it also is very descriptive, because I feel like sometimes too we get caught up in a lot of labels and calling things different things, and I get lost in it.
Absolutely. It's
But
one of my first things when
Yeah.
I start coaching is just tell me about the behavior. If you say my child's abusive to me, which really I
That's
hate
not.
to hear it when parents are so negative towards their kids, but it's like, what are they doing? Tell me about the behavior. Why do you think they're doing that? Where is that coming from?
Yeah.
Because if you start labeling, it's a way of distancing yourself from your own child. You're putting yourself in an adversarial position. I mean, I don't even like it when people say, oh, my toxic ex, even though I'm guilty of having a book titled Co-Parenting with the Toxic Ex. I will tell you, the publishers forced that title on me. I did not want that title. I don't like calling people labels. So yes, I think we're
It's
all
back
in
to
agreement.
making people accountable for their behaviors, because I know in a lot of the conversations I have with a lot of the kids I'm appointed to, or even the supervision that we do, certain people are not changing the behaviors. And to me, that's important. If you're going to do whatever you're going to do with this relationship, if you're not seeing a change in the behavior, like a child that I have custody of, it's been 10 years, and the behaviors of the parents have not changed. So the child has distanced himself from those parents because he doesn't approve of what's happening, and he doesn't want to be a part of that. So to me, that's the behaviors aren't changing. And I really like that approach with that. I think it's more descriptive.
And you can think somebody's narcissistic, but it doesn't matter if they're not behaving in a way that is harmful. And so this is like one of the things I'll say, like, let's say you have a court order where you're allowed to call your child every Wednesday when they're at the other parent's house. And let's imagine there's a landline. I have to update my scenario here, but let's just imagine there's a landline. You call and the parent picks up the phone and says, "Oh, it's you, jerk," and hangs up. That's a bad act. They're violating a court order. It doesn't matter if they're doing it because they're a narcissist or a sociopath or whatever. It doesn't, it's like somebody can be a pedophile, but if they're not acting on it, that's very different than somebody who's a pedophile who's acting on it. So to me, the label doesn't tell you what's actually happening. And that's what's relevant.
So we talked about some behaviors with the parent, but in the model, and now what are some behaviors in the child?
Right. Sorry, you asked about that.
No, it's fine.
There's 8 behavioral manifestations of alienated kids. This list comes from Dr. Richard Gardner. He was talking about this in the 80s. He was really onto something in his writings about alienation, but he also was, in my opinion, very much misunderstood and reviled and controversial. So most people don't reference him anymore, but I don't think you can talk about these 8 behaviors without saying where they came from. The 17 comes from me. The model comes from me. These 8 behaviors, which is factor 5, comes from him. And I'm the person who did do research to establish that these behaviors are not seen in kids who were abused towards their abusive parent. But he did, on just based on his observations and clinical wisdom, identify the 8 behaviors. So the thing about the 8 behaviors is they have these labels that can be misunderstood. So like the first one is called campaign of denigration. And people just say, that's present because my ex is saying bad things about me. And they kind of forget, no, these are behaviors of the child. So the campaign of denigration means that the child is gleefully, willingly, happily saying bad things about the parent they're rejecting to other people. As an extreme example, I had a case where the kid actually wrote a letter to the local newspaper saying, "Don't vote for my mom for school board because she's a horrible person." But if you dig deeper into the campaign of denigration, another way that I think about it is past, present, and future. So the past, what I mean is if you ask an alienated kid, tell me a positive memory you have about, let's just say dad's the targeted, rejected parent. Tell me something positive about dad. Abused kids would be able to say, "Oh, I love my dad. He did this. It was fun, blah, blah," except when he started beating me and then I don't like him anymore. Alienated kids will say, "Nothing. I have no positive memories. Never, ever, ever, ever. I can't think of anything good." So they're erasing the past. In the present, they're doing that campaign. They're happily telling everybody how horrible their parent is. The future refers to the fact that if you ask an alienated kid, how can your dad make it right so you can have a relationship? What needs to happen now so in the future you can have a good relationship? Abused kids will be, well, tell them to stop doing crack, tell them to stop, right? They can come up with a list. Alienated kids, nothing. There's nothing this person can do to fix things. In fact, I did this study where we had people sit down with alienated kids and answer these questions in writing. And the kids always wrote in capital letters with like 13 exclamation points. There's nothing they could do. I can't even imagine ever, ever, ever having a relationship. So that's the first of the 8. There's 7 more. Each one you can really, if it's explained, it's understandable what it is. And there's research showing that abused kids don't do these things, just alienated kids.
Interesting. That
Yeah,
makes a difference.
that is. What are some subtle, like, early warning signs that of alienation, or that that professionals can pick up, or that they often miss, or parents that maybe after the divorce, like, some things that you can miss?
I think it's lack of trust, that the kid becomes suspicious of the motives of the parent. So it's like, you served me broccoli 2 nights in a row because you are bad and don't, you know, and don't love me. Or you came 10 minutes early, you're stalking me. Oh, you came 10 minutes late, you're lazy and don't care. It's beginning to distrust the motives, intentions, and love of the targeted parent. So it doesn't really happen overnight. It's this slow, erosion of the child's ability to experience the parent as safe, loving, and available, where the child becomes unforgiving, because all parents mess up.
Mm.
All parents have empathic lapses where they could have been kinder. I'm not saying they were cruel and abusive, but just a little distracted when the kid needed them or whatever. Come a little early, come a little late. The house is a little too clean or too messy, or the food's a little too spicy. Whatever. Nobody's, we're not perfect,
We're
right? All
human.
parents
Human parents.
hurt, frustrate, and disappoint their kids.
Yeah.
But most kids cut their parents slack, minimize. Oh, that's okay, Dad. Don't worry that you forgot the ice cream. You can get it tomorrow. They might be annoyed, but they're not unforgiving. But when your child takes longer and longer to forgive you or to accept that your intentions were good, and there's absence of abuse or neglect, it's most likely you're going down an alienation road.
Which is
So,
important to know, because so many of our professionals in these situations going through family court and the different people you have to come in contact, they don't recognize that.
yeah,
They just
that's
don't.
my next
We're
question was,
trained.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, like how do we get, like, where's the work in that? Like getting the GALs, the judges, the magistrates, the lawyers to really recognize what is going on. How do you do that?
I'm very discouraged by where we are as a field, because the leading national, maybe even international organization is AFCC, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. They provide the training for not only, but they are the leading organization for training for judges and lawyers and mediators and GALs and parenting coordinators and custody evaluators. All of the decision makers around, is this alienation or is it estrangement? They all get together at this big national meeting. They have a journal, and every state or many states have chapters. The problem is that they ascribe to what's called the hybrid model. The hybrid model says in most cases where a child rejects a parent, it's both parents' fault. And
A high conflict divorce, right? It's instead of one person, doing some things, we've got this new coined phrase of it's a high conflict. That's what we're hearing all the time in court,
right, so it's blaming the parents. And there was another term. So maybe 10 years ago, the term resist refuse got promoted by them. And I don't really I don't have a problem with that. If you think about it as a descriptive term, it's like factor one of the Baker model. The kid is resisting and refusing. I think you want to find out about the other 4 factors to understand what's going on. They basically feel that that's enough information, and they want to, this is my opinion, like based on, I've gone to the conference, I've talked to the people, I read their journal. They're usually the people who are testifying as expert witnesses against the alienation experts. So I've faced them, I come in saying, here's what alienation is, and they'll come in and say, well, alienation is extremely rare. It's barely ever happens. Most cases are hybrid. And, the interesting thing is that might actually be true. But you still want to treat each case as it could be alienation, it could be estrangement, it could be a hybrid. If you start by thinking every case is a hybrid, then you treat every case the same. And what do they generally recommend? Let the kid choose. the kid's better off, even if it's alienation. Alienation isn't that bad. And the targeted parent, if they're lucky, gets reunification therapy by a therapist who blames the targeted parent because they also generally think it's a hybrid. That's why I don't know what the solution is. There's kind of,
Yeah, I don't either. We were
they
talking
have
about,
the power. They have the power. They have the major journal. They have this conference. There have to be real epiphany on their part. And the interesting thing is, I went to their conference one year. I was like invited to be a keynote, which was shocking. But it was a keynote where it was a panel debate, and they had their leader, beloved person debating me, saying alienation doesn't exist. But I was allowed by them to put a piece of paper on every chair with a survey. This is pre, QR codes. And I asked them, do you think it's possible for a parent to get a child to reject a parent who doesn't deserve to be rejected? Something like, basically, do you think alienate? And 80-90% of them said yes. Their own membership, but the organization, but they might even say, yes, it exists, but it's very, very rare. So I don't know. So I don't really know what the solution is.
yeah, we've talked about that a lot. Like, how do we bring that education? And we talked this morning, and you may say this is like a crazy idea, but in my mind, my experience, I feel like that when you have a divorce situation and you have, sometimes marriages just don't work out. They just don't. And you have healthy parents and they go through that and they're amicable through that. And not to say that there won't be some conflict here and there, but they work through it. They both take time with the kids. They both do what's in the best interest of the kids. But then when you have another situation that's so high conflict and you have one that is constantly berating the other parent, that parent who is being abused is the quieter one, is the one who's more meek, who is more not, because they're so beaten down. Like, how do we educate? I mean, and maybe you would say that's not a great example, but I feel like if they're looking at the situation and they're using that to kind of have some discernment on what's going on, wouldn't that be something that could help judges maybe understand and see things through a little bit of a different lens?
I'm not sure I caught the it. What's the it that would help judges see things
So
differently?
if it's a high conflict, the one who is badgering the other parent, who is stating, well, they've done this, they've done that, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, and they're that this is the parent over here who is making themselves look like they're maybe the victim, or they're the ones who is being receiving all of this, and this other parent, but this other parent's beaten down so much they're not going to defend themselves. They can't.
So I'll push back a little bit,
Okay,
which
that's
is,
what I
I
want. Yeah.
definitely think there are cases where one parent has more money, power, confidence, and enjoys going to court and strutting around and oppressing and depressing the other parent. But I also see cases where the rejected parent has the inner and external resources to try to fight back. And I wouldn't want them to be, for anybody to assume that the parent who files the most motions is the parent who's bad. I feel like that could then discourage. I just know plenty of cases myself where the rejected parent decides to take the other parent to court for contempt because they're not following the parenting plan. And we wouldn't want them to be seen as weaponizing. See, I hate all that jargon, weaponizing the system, because sometimes it makes sense to be the person who files a motion, because if you don't, then it looks like you don't care. And then by the time they end up in court, the judge is like, well, why did you wait a year? Why, and then they lose out for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's why I was asking, because it just seems
Yeah.
like there is such a difference there. In some of the cases that we've worked on, it does seem like the abusive parent is the one that is pushing and saying and doing the things, while the other one is so beaten down and so quiet.
It's funny because I feel like I've seen the opposite more, which is the parent who does a time grab. They just take the kid. They don't return the kid after the weekend, or they, whatever. They pick up the kid at school when they're not supposed to. they don't need to go to court. They're forcing the other parent to decide whether they have to go to court or not because they have what they want. They've already stolen the kid. And now the other parent has to be the one who decides, do I have the money? Do I have the time? Well, if I go to court, then are they gonna, I mean, the fear about going to court is, well, then they're going to ask for full custody and they could win. So maybe I should just shut up and not go to court but then I think it's it's you could just spin your wheels.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, I'm thinking, back to Dr. Baker, the research that you have done to do the model and to build the structure, and then to go to a conference where you have the data, you have the material to back it up, and judges are ignoring that or not really taking that seriously. That's got to be incredibly frustrating for just the whole system. I mean, we're trying to do our little small little thing, in our town, in our state and everything. But, thinking about change and how do we really, really get there, because this is impacting families, this is impacting people, this is, you know, the targeted parent is, severe PTSD because they don't have their child with them. They've been, alienated, and the after effects of all this, and yet it's still kind of like, we know about it, but we don't see it, whatever kind of thing.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's that's the part that's, how do we get there? That's the real thing of why I think we wanted you on here is
Oh, I
just,
wish I had a solution.
yeah, well, right. I know. And
I don't. When I was an expert witness, I could see what the judge was doing. And in fact, most of the time, I would sort of swivel my chair and talk to the judge, right? Sometimes the judges were hanging on every word, taking notes. How do you spell amygdala? Amygdala again, because I would be talking about brain development.
right.
Sometimes they were sleeping, sometimes they were playing solitaire.
My God.
I had a judge once say, I was giving some example about a parent who hadn't seen their child in 3 months. I'm just making up something. And the judge actually said, oh, I could live 3 months. I'd love to not see my kid for 3 months.
Yeah.
So the judges have so much judicial discretion. And one of the problems is, every state has a best interest of the child law. And it delineates how the judge should decide in a custody dispute. And it gives them a list of factors. Here's the 5 things, 7 things, 11 things, whatever that you should pay attention to. And it varies state by state. But the only factor that's consistent across every state is the preference of the child. And no law tells the judge how much weight to give each factor. So let's say you have a state where there's 10 factors, and let's say dad is better on 9 of the 10, objectively speaking, spent more time with the child, lives closer to the school, whatever the factors are. But the kid prefers to live with mom. The judges can say, well, kid wants to live with mom, so I'm going to go with that. So there's so many elements of the system that make it hard for targeted parents. The custody evaluators generally just want to leave things the way they are. They're very mamby-pamby in my experience. Not all, but many of them just want to kind of keep things the way they are. And then you have judges who are very risk averse. They're very afraid of making a kid be with the parent who then maybe would hurt that parent, or the kid maybe would hurt themselves. Because you often have fear mongering on the side of the favored parent who just wants to keep the kid. So there's so many elements that work against a real solution.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm not an expert witness anymore.
No, I can
And
understand that.
I don't even do research anymore because it's impossible to get research funding. And it's very hard to even find journals that will publish this. I submitted to that one journal run by that organization, and they just kept losing my manuscript. Oh no, we can't find it. So
Yeah.
I do other research, and I spend my PA brain on helping individual parents. So I do coaching. That's what I feel is the most satisfying and effective way to try to intervene. It's at the
making a very big difference, I'm sure. And
And so
that, yeah, and that brings us, I mean, oh, we're running out of time and we'd love to keep talking. But this has all been such great information. We definitely will have your information if anyone needs to contact you or has more questions. We will absolutely support that. And thank you so much for coming on today. This has just been really, really insightful. Thank you so much.
I know,
Thanks for
Dr. Baker, my head is just, always all the, these conversations always get me started in thinking about how do we really make change and how do we do. And so your research is invaluable. I mean, I hope that, one day we can kind of, really take that model and, you know, use it, really work,
Believers out of it, yeah.
yeah,
No,
work.
everybody has to find their space. So there are people
Yeah.
who want to do advocacy and legislative work. Great. That just happens not to be my strong suit or where my, if I have any talent, it's not there. So luckily, there are people working at all levels. I'm working at the individual level because that's what makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Well,
so much for being here today. We really appreciate
I
it.
just
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank yous too, because I look at your stuff and what you've done and the amazing impact that you've made in our world. And I continue to, want to keep doing the podcast and keep bringing light to the subject because it's so important. And so thank you. And like Beth said, we will put your contact information on our website and ways that people can get coaching from you. So thank you so much for your
Thanks
time.
for doing that. All
Yep.
right.
And this wraps up another episode of Stronger Roots, and we are here to bring the information to you to help you and your family to be able to heal and move forward. If you have any questions, please let us know, and we're looking for our website. It is coming out very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.